long before Anthony Bourdain was taking people to parts unknown, and tahini had fled the bonds of hummus to become an ingredient in everything from brownies to salad dressing, my father's grandmother was putting calf brains in the mix she used to fill ravioli. And my mother's parents enjoyed tongue, just a cow tongue, roasted in the oven, and consumed in thin slices. As a young child, I loved my great-grandmother's ravioli. Sadly, I cannot say I shared my grandparents' enthusiasm for a big hunk of roasted tongue. Personal preferences aside, these examples illustrate what is for me a lifelong interest in the food of here and the food of far-off places. Let's be honest. I leave home to eat and to drink. People like me who wonder about food also share an interest in the people and the places where these foods originated, meals that have tantalized and repelled. Reflections on and attempts to recreate the food of my travels, everywhere from Italy to Pakistan, naturally led to the history of those cuisines. They also led to the stories of merchants, travelers, and the just plain curious. The words of my travelers also led to something that I did not expect. With each new tale came a window into the intersection between food, race, and identity. For our time today, step with me into a small stretch of that intersection, into the tales of travelers of the pre-modern Mediterranean and the Silk Road. But first, a story. Al-Izadiyah, a West Bank town not far from Jerusalem. According to legend, it is the ancient site of Bethany and the home of Lazarus, whom Jesus raised from the dead. For these reasons alone, it is worth a visit. It is also home to a small roadside bakery that makes the most amazing manaish, best described to the uninitiated as spice-ground lamb-topped pizza. A Levantine delight that may be the precursor of a similar treat attributed to Italy, and a dish that has the power to soothe even the most stressful of days, is best enjoyed in the company of others, even if it means having to share, and the first bite of which leaves me contemplating centuries, indeed millennia, of human interaction. Despite many bites over the years, I still struggle with how best to describe my dear manaish, as it is not just about the food. It is about the people, for who it has been part of their daily lives for more generations than I can count backwards. Its ingredients both shared and fought over. Who makes the best hummus? Whose grandmother bakes the best bread? What lamb concoctions are truly the most comforting? Although the vocabulary has changed, we Homo sapiens have wondered about race and identity since we started encountering groups of people very different from ourselves, sometimes determining with deadly consequences that we did not much care for them. Human genocidal tendencies towards people and species we fear does not, however, do justice to the entirety of human interactions. Indeed, it is through the discourse of food that we may have found some common ground, that somehow, in the shared act of eating, we become more knowable, more intelligible, and perhaps more human. Since antiquity, food and people have been related. The Roman naturalist Pliny, who died in 79 CE, described the riches of Arabia that gave it the names happy and blessed. And why not? By Pliny's day, Arabia Felix, or Happy Arabia, produced, among other things, cane sugar. And surely, any people in possession of such a sweet treat must be both happy and blessed. Not all were as optimistic as our Roman naturalists. In the 13th century, Marco Polo was recounting tales of cannibalism. According to Polo, strangers to the Andaman Islands in the Indian archipelago were, if captured, devoured by what Polo decried as a very cruel race. In the 14th century, the Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta also shared an encounter with cannibalism. According to Battuta, while traveling in what he simply described as the land of the blacks, today the sub-Saharan region around Mali, he encountered a sultan of a certain village who treated some visiting dignitaries to a banquet, the main course of which was a slave woman that had been killed and cooked in their honor. The non-Christians of the East were described as monstrous races by a 14th century someone who called himself Sir John Mandeville. And yet Mandeville marveled at the variety of produce available in the markets along the Silk Road. Huge pears and juicy, fragrant peaches, which are quite a delicacy. All was not cannibals, idolaters, and monopods, people who hopped around on one large foot. Returning to Polo, the people of Java may have lived like beasts, but they also had coconuts, apples of paradise, likely bananas, and cloves. My favorite example, however, perhaps comes from the earliest introductions of coffee and the coffee house from Beirut and Damascus. Described as a very good drink, excellent in illness, as black as ink and taken as hot as they can stand it, the German physician Leonhard Rauwolf first introduced people back in Europe to the joys of coffee in the latter part of the 16th century. George Sandys, a near contemporary of Rauwolf, also described the proprietors of the coffee houses. Although Sandys claimed erroneously that proprietors kept young boys as prostitutes to lure in a male clientele, he also remarked that these institutions were lively spaces where men could gather for a range of respectable activities. As these examples suggest, pre-modern Europeans saw people through two lenses, that of race and that as purveyors of strange, if delightful, foodstuffs. Archaeologists, paleontologists, paleobotanists, evolutionary biologists, and others, through sequencing genomes, digging, and researching, give some important context to these stories. For example, the coffee bean is native to the highlands of Ethiopia, and thus it thrived in the highlands of Yemen when it was introduced there by the Aksumite army that invaded Yemen from Ethiopia in the 6th century CE. To understand what these foods meant about a strange yet alluring other, we need our travelers. Despite words that in 2020 rightly offend, cannibals, the land of the blacks, as if there was no discernible difference among the people of Africa south of the Sahara, and monstrous races, we are well served to heed the advice of the scholar Stephen Greenblatt, who advises us to look beyond the words, to find a people grappling with their encounters with the world, marveling that people so strange and thus so scary were also in possession of juicy, fragrant peaches, sweet sugar, delectable spices, and exhilarating coffee. Using the descriptors at their disposal, it is true, the people of the East became known by their looks as marks of their identity. These were not, however, the only markers. They also became known for their food, and it raised a question. How could people so unknowable and thus so scary also be the purveyors of strange, if delectable, foodstuffs? A conundrum, perhaps, still with us today. I close tonight with a very personal look at the intersection of food, race, and identity. From Havana to Jerusalem and many points in between, I have watched as my students embraced 5 shekel tubi, a citrusy Israeli liquor, discussed peace and conflict long into the night over a hookah, ate with relish plantains, kebabs, the delicacies of that venerable Irish tradition, afternoon tea, and participated joyously in a cooking class in Petra, Jordan. What began as simply delight in the food became so much more. In every meal, snack, and bite on the run were the people who cooked it and with whom we shared it. In every bite were memories of occupation, misunderstanding, and starvation, just as surely as there were memories of joyous celebration across the divide of race and identity. For me, Manaish will always be a small part of Palestine, prepared by people I may or may not know, eaten in the company of those who mean a great deal to me, and impossible without the blessings of the land and the livestock. My students tell a similar story. For some, Guinness and potatoes will always be the history and hardships of their Irish ancestors. For others, a particular sandwich will always represent the complexities of the island of Cuba and people who welcomed us into their lives and into their homes. In all of this lies the proof. Food will always bear the marks of identity with the power to divide. It has the same power to join and to allow us to see one another as just a bit more human. Thank you.